Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a totally fascinating, centuries-long detective story. We're looking at a breakdown of how Western materialistic sciences tried to solve what is honestly the ultimate historical mystery, the origin of human religion. So, armed with all these newly developed fields of study, early scientists set out to pin down exactly where faith came from. So did science replace religion, or did it just completely misunderstand it? Let's kick things off with this question because it perfectly sets the stage for what we're about to unpack. You see, early modern scientists, equipped with all this newfound rationality from the Enlightenment, well, they might have been looking at ancient beliefs through entirely the wrong lenses. Did they actually explain religion, or did they just construct new myths to replace the old ones? Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, the mystery of religion's origin, followed by the age of materialism, then evolution and illusion theories. From there, we'll hit the collapse of materialistic theories, look at religion as symbols and power, and finally wrap up with the disenchantment of the world. Let's get into it. Section 1, the mystery of religion's origin. To really start our investigation, we have to look back at early anthropologists. They traveled the globe studying indigenous, or what they termed primitive tribes, and their goal was incredibly ambitious. They essentially hoped to find the absolute earliest seeds of human belief, assuming they could just unlock the original, raw version of human religion by observing these groups. Now, this is wild. The modern concept of religion didn't even exist for ancient peoples. If you look at the original Latin, religio meant a broad web of social obligations to your family, your neighbors, and the gods. Ancient societies had these totally integrated ways of life. Think Dharma in India or Halakha in Judaism. Faith, politics, daily societal rules, the whole shebang. They were completely inseparable. The idea of a separate, isolated religious sphere is actually a purely modern invention. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're looking at today. It shows how the Western academic approach shifted across 3 centuries. We kick off with 18th century Enlightenment hubris, move into the 19th century with its rigid theories of evolution and Marxism, and then hit the 20th century, which brings a massive postmodern critique crashing down on everything that came before it. Which brings us to Section 2, the age of materialism. Moving into this era, there was a massive paradigm shift. As science and industry started cranking out incredibly tangible results, a purely materialist worldview really took hold. The new scientific consensus essentially decided to completely exclude theology from the pursuit of knowledge. They argued that to be scientific meant you had to be entirely devoid of any spiritual or religious assumptions. Take Auguste Comte, for example, often considered the founder of sociology. He saw human history as this totally straight, linear line of progress. Comte figured society basically just outgrows religion as it gets more civilized. He argued humanity starts in a primitive, theological stage where we invent gods, moves into a metaphysical stage of abstract thought, and finally matures into the positivist stage, which is governed strictly by scientific reason. Section 3. Evolution and illusion theories. So, because early modern thinkers had decided religion was unscientific, they had to invent theories for why it existed in the first place, right? They essentially created their own unprovable origin myths to explain away ancient faith. And you can really see how these grand theories were just heavily biased by whatever specific field the thinker was working in. Karl Marx looked at it through economics, calling faith the opiate of the masses, basically an illusion used by rulers to control workers. Sigmund Freud, using psychology, reduced God to a projected childhood fear of a father figure. And Emile Durkheim used sociology, claiming religion was just a society unconsciously worshiping its own social bonds. They each took this incredibly complex spiritual belief and reduced it down to their own narrow discipline. Then you had anthropologists like Edward Tylor pushing this concept of animism. The source explains that these evolutionary thinkers basically assumed our ancestors had childlike minds. According to this theory, ancient humans were just super confused and terrified by nature. So, out of sheer ignorance, they mistakenly assigned souls to rivers, trees, and lightning, and started worshiping them. All right, Section 4, Collapse of Materialistic Theories. Because right here is where the plot twist happens. As the 20th century rolled around, anthropologists actually went out into the field and did extensive long-term research. And what they found? It completely shattered those confident linear theories. All those neat little boxes created by Enlightenment thinkers just started falling apart. So the old linear evolution theory said that societies graduate strictly from magic, to religion, and finally up to science, right? But Bronislaw Malinowski's research proved that that was completely wrong. He observed that these tribes were highly complex. They were using rigorous empirical science to build tools and navigate, while simultaneously engaging in magic and religious rituals. They were doing it all at the exact same time in the exact same minds. Science didn't replace faith for them. They just served completely different purposes. And the devastating critiques just kept piling up. John Swanton pointed out that early humans weren't just terrified children. Feeling awe at a storm didn't automatically mean you started worshiping it out of fear. Franz Boas proved that cultures absolutely do not evolve on a single linear track. They have unique, relative paths. And maybe most surprisingly, Andrew Lang found evidence that a belief in a supreme high god, like a primitive monotheism, often existed in societies well before they ever developed animism or nature worship. Section 5. Religion as Symbols and Power. Realizing they were basically at a dead end trying to find the historical origin of faith, modern anthropology pivoted. Instead of asking, where did this come from, they started asking, how does this actually function within a society today? Clifford Geertz was a real game changer here. He argued that if you want to understand a culture's religion, you don't go hunting for primitive origins. You look at its symbols. He viewed religion entirely as a cultural system of symbols that shape the morality, moods, and psychology of a community. For him, it provided the whole framework for how people understand reality. But, it's never quite that simple. Talal Asad, a Muslim anthropologist, brought forward a fascinating critique of Geertz. He argued that symbols don't just magically appear out of nowhere. Instead, they are actively forged by political power and authority. They're reinforced by societal discipline and sustained through consistent rituals. So basically, power dynamics play a massive role in deciding what actually becomes a sacred symbol. Finally, Section 6, Disenchantment of the World. As we reach our final stage, we have to look at the ultimate consequence of this whole materialistic journey. What actually happens to a society that decides, based on those early linear theories, to just discard these powerful, meaning-making religious structures entirely? Well, sociologist Pitarim Sorokin looked at human history and identified two main cultural cycles, the spiritual and the materialist. And he warned that the West's extreme shift into a purely materialist cycle was going to inevitably lead to a profound and, frankly, dangerous loss of deep meaning. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial concept, disenchantment. Max Weber coined this term for the modern condition, where the world is completely stripped of the mystical, the sacred, or the divine. Instead, everything is replaced solely by rational calculation, numbers, and science. The analysis points out that this means we now live in a highly effective, incredibly technological world, but it's one that is inherently cold and devoid of spiritual warmth. Weber was seriously worried about where this was all headed. He famously feared that without the overarching meaning that faith historically provided, modern man would find himself trapped in an iron cage of bureaucracy, hyper-rationality, and endless production. We built the perfect machine, but we locked ourselves inside it. So as we wrap up today's explainer, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. The whole history of how we've tried to study faith reveals just as much about us today as it does about ancient humanity. If science gives us the incredible tools we need to survive, but religion gave us the meaning to live, is a purely rational, disenchanted world truly enough for the human spirit? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the lens through which you view the world.